Good afternoon, Dr. Teodoro Ayllon.
Very good, very good. I like that. Not everybody can say Teodoro, and certainly troublesome Ayllon. So that's a great start.
Okay, well, it's so nice to have you here and have a chance to visit with you about your history in behavior analysis, because you are certainly one of the people who've had the longest history in behavior analysis. You were one of the first people I ever read in
Great.
behavior analysis. So we are interested in how did you become a behavior analyst?
Well, not easily, because when I started, what we had was really largely a very, shall we say, a very different kind of context within which to do anything behavioral. First of all, behaviors were largely confined to laboratory, and that meant you were persona non grata if you were from clinical interest into the laboratory. I mean, and not only that, but basically if you didn't like working with rats, which I certainly didn't, I felt that there was really not much there. And it wasn't even the behaviors, it was the learning theorists. Behaviors really, at least in my, my own work, really didn't come until very late. What we had was the usual, very powerful, very strong learning theorists. Among them, of course, Hall, Tolman, Guthrie. All these people are tremendous people, and reading about them years later was better, because I couldn't understand them then, because there was too much theory. That's why I couldn't understand them. And it was only when I read something by Lindsley, Ogden Lindsley, that was the first time I realized that there was something about really doing something with very unusually difficult people. And by that time, I had the fortune of having worked in a couple of three different hospitals in the summers, to pick up a little money and understand if I really was interested in psychology. And I almost dropped psychology, actually, because I didn't see where anything that I had learned had anything to do with what I saw. What I saw, say, in a place for what they call the trainably retarded. Those were the days when those particular kinds of diagnoses were made. And what I saw was that the people who had not even finished high school, who were cottage mothers, they called them, they had about maybe 20 people, sometimes 30 kids sleeping in a large area. And what I was struck by was that these very nice, very effective ladies, knew where everybody slept when everything looked the same. And I thought it was a trick, and so I asked if I could ask some of the kids to find their bed. And of course they did. But it all looked the same. Every sheet was white, and every place was, you just could not actually, unless you had a scorecard. I didn't see how you could actually find anybody, And the kids who were supposed to be retarded didn't have any trouble at all. And so I thought, I ought to kind of find out how that is possible. And so I started doing what I had learned in learning theory, something about set things, that if you have a cue basically here or there, maybe that's what we're going by. And so I started fooling around. Maybe it was next to the window, maybe it was away from the window, but they still found their beds. And that, to me, was really the beginning of, I gotta find out about it. Unfortunately, Skinner at the time was regarded as a little on the nutty side, because he was collecting information that nobody could care about, because it was painted to me in a psychology class as a sort of here's a man who actually is basically developing bricks, going to build something, but it's brick after brick after. Nobody knows what this is going to look like. I mean, we don't even have a design. There's no theory about we're going this way or that way. I was impressed by that kind of description. I thought, well, I don't see how there's any use for this either. So I was very disappointed, and I was about to drop. In fact, I would not be going against, shall we say, everyone in doing something that was a little too far out. And within those things, actually, it was very easy. There were people who were constantly sort of being aggressive, other people who had refused to eat, and they were being tube-fed, spoon-fed. On some occasion, I had used the electric shock to really start the whole thing, and so I got interested in that. And as a consequence of that, then I did a variety of different studies, maybe about a dozen or so, which served as my dissertation. And so it was from there that actually I was able to see that we could have, for example, speaking of people who have problems eating or refuse to eat, well, we had a good number of them.
Now, excuse me, where was this dissertation conducted, research? Where
The dissertation was, of course, at the University of Houston under Jack Michael.
Jack, yeah.
And what I found was that there were people who, again, were refusing to eat, and so the attendants would basically, to keep them alive and everything, did all kinds of things, and they would soothe them, and they try to talk to them, and they try to do all kinds of things, but they ended up often spoon feeding them like babies, and that's what got me started into. If we could get past that, we did, but then that was actually took about 3 days. Namely, to allow the patients to wait until they kind of realized nobody was coming to feed them, and so they went to the dining room on their own. Well, that was too easy. And so I thought, why not really begin to have something that would allow them to really display additional skills? Well, in order to do that, we had to set up the environment so that now, in order for them to be able to go into the dining room, they had to do it within basically 5 minutes at the beginning. It used to be we'd wait a half hour, but of course it was not needed, but we did at the beginning, and then realized that gradually we could get it down to 20, 10, 5, 3 minutes, and they all went. Then the next thing was, if they can do that, could they actually cooperate with one another? And that idea came actually from Lindsley Asrin, who had published previously cooperation with kids. Mm-hmm. Again, at the time was, strictly speaking, modeling how it could be done. What we did at Saskatchewan, what we did was have a table that actually had two buttons. They could not be pressed simultaneously by one person. You needed someone on one end and the other on the other to press it at the same time. And if they did, there was a nice noise and a light to give them feedback, and then they would get a coin. That's when it started the view that if these people were very debilitated behaviorally, emotionally, if they could actually begin to wait on one another, and they would wait. They would ask each other, Mary, come and push the button. No, don't do it right now. Do it when I do it. In other words, what I saw is these people begin to have a repertoire that you never saw before. They would correct, they would help. Let me help you. They would show each other, etc. So we found that people would cooperate, and they would get a coin. With that coin, they would deposit as they went into the dining room. And of course, this had to be done, remember, within a very short period of time. What happened if they didn't? They missed that meal. Not forever, because the next meal everybody had learned, you don't fool around with this, the bus leaves kind of thing. You're either on the bus, off the bus. You can't sort of, just think about it. So they had timing. They learned to time their actions to the environmental kind of requirements.
Shows you the power of contingencies.
That's right.
Just amazing.
That is right. And that was one of the first articles published actually by JAB, the Journal of Experimental Analysis of Behavior. And what we found was, again, after doing it in different ways, it became too easy to do that. And so the question was, what else can we do to show that these folks are learning. Well, we thought to do a variety of other things, and it came at a time when I realized we have to move on to really a much greater degree of, if you will, sophistication. And it was at that time that Nate and I got together. Historically, Gold Diamond put us together. I had always been, of course, very, very impressed by Nate. Nate is a very good writer, great methodologist, and that I needed to learn. And so I went with him. And, of course, I was the one who, not surprisingly, knew that we could do it, because I had done it. What I didn't have is the methodology to make it as it should be, highly experimental, so that there was no question that whatever it is that we were doing was really happening. I learned that. I learned that very nicely. And of course, the rest, as they say, is history. That's how the book came about.
It certainly is. It is indeed. How do you think that behavior analysis has changed over the course of your time working in it?
Well, I think my impression has been over the years, really, that we're going too slowly. I don't know why we're going too slowly. I thought when I came down to work at Georgia State, that I said, within 5 years, we're going to be, and later on somebody quoted me, and I said, well, so it's taking a little time, But what it is that we got interested in basically trying to determine a great many things in the way that one would if one had already sort of had a good idea about what the territory was composed by, sort of like going west, and you begin to just stay in one particular county kind of thing, and you wanted to find out everything about that county, which I think obviously there is a very, very much need for those things. But at the beginning, the idea is, how far can we go? That was my idea. That's what I did after that. I decided I'm giving up going on a given population because I'll stay with that. I did for about 10 years with respect to the mentally ill, but I realized that we could go on forever with that because there's a lot more. The only thing was, I think, a matter of both personal choice and taste, if you will, and what I thought was necessary. I think what is necessary is to show, that was my idea anyway at the beginning, to show that it does work. I wasn't sure that it would work anywhere else, as a matter of fact. Maybe with a mental, as they used to say, yeah, sure, with mentally ill, they don't know what they're doing, and they don't know what is happening, and, but I was interested in that. They would tell me that. I was interested in that. I said, well, I think we are interested in that, but in also other areas. It's just that, other people are going to be coming along and take care of those others. Well, they have. But I think still it's too slow. I think, for example, that a major thing, which I learned after I left Anna State Hospital, where we did the book, I learned that there was something I had never actually seen because I was not educated in this country. I had never been in a classroom with kids, observing kids, and certainly teachers. And I was, I was really shocked. Again, I went to lots of classrooms, and I had arranged to just be, sort of a quiet, never asked a question, and I only watched and observed, which is what I had done with, mental hospitals, because I liked that as a way to try to get to what is it that people do, how do they do it, and I found that first of all, I found there were only about 30 children in the classroom. I came from 80 kids in my classroom when I grew up, and graduated from high school. About 60 graduated from high school.
And where was that?
This is in Bolivia. It's a small country, landlocked. You'd think they'd never get anywhere. But some good schools. actually taught us something. And one of the things is to read and write and want to graduate, you know. I mean, there was no such thing as certification for just attending. No, you graduate or you flunked. And people were flunking. I mean, there were kids that just didn't make it. But they would repeat the course and move on. That was, you know, the hard. That's when I found out they don't do that here. And I thought, how amazing. And then the next thing I found was that they kept repeating instructions a lot, meaning don't do it, stop, etc. And I thought, that's not fair to the teacher. I mean, it's wasting a lot of her time. But on the other hand, I also noticed that the kids seem to have a much better time with one another than with the subject matter. I thought, there's got to be some other way. Anyway, thank God by that time, Mont Wolf had already been doing work with schools and classrooms. And so I thought it'd be nice to, instead of doing anything else, get into how it is that we could improve on that. And so that got me into really away from clinics, even though I was really given a job as a research associate to do a clinic. They wanted me to do a clinic for children. And I said, after seeing the classrooms and so on, I decided that the children who were being sent to the clinic were being sent to the wrong place, because the right place is where they're catching the problem, which was the classroom. And so I did several things along those lines. And again, I thought, okay, I got it to my satisfaction. That's as much as I can do. And now, how about doing something else? But in the context of that, I, of course, worked with hyperactive kids in the classroom. And again, the same story. Maybe if we actually have some contingencies for the to support academic work and not the medication, that we might be able to observe that, in fact, if they do well with this kind of behavioral thing, we could compare it to the same kids. The same kids compare with themselves and see how they do with the drug. And we found, again, that with the drug, yeah, the behavior, oh boy, you can't improve on that. It's really very good, no question about it. The conduct is kept at a minimum. However, the learning, turns out, their tests, they're down. Mm-hmm. And so by rearranging that again, we found, of course, that the academic work would go much better. We're talking about 80% better than what they started with if we had contingency management.
And then you went as far as that would take you, and what did you do after that?
Well, after that, actually, I started sort of, again, finding out that if you did it a little bit here, a little bit there, I thought, would it be nice to show that, in fact, behavioral kind of approach really is applicable to a variety of things. But instead of having to say it is applicable theoretically, I thought it'd be nice to give a little examples. So I went into sports. And again, the idea was, it just happened that I played a lot of tennis at the time, and I thought, why is it that some people have to be constantly taught the same thing again? And to make a long story short, in tennis we found that ordinarily the coach is really going on negative stuff. Don't do it. Why do you do it? You're doing it again. How many times? It's practically a refrain from classrooms. I mean, they learn the same thing. You got to tell them when they're wrong. And so we compare it to what happens if you don't say anything about that. You only tell them, give them feedback when they're right. And we noticed, again, the increase on different strokes, as they call it, whether it's serving or backhand or forehand. We compare it to each other, and no question about it. I mean, if you do it in a positive fashion, you get going. From that, I went to an area that ordinarily most people don't quite do it, and that is with people who get burned like third degree or something like that. It's very hard to work with those folks, because when you go to one of these burn clinics, you actually have kids. You have not kids. These are adults. These adults fight it because it hurts. I mean, it shouldn't take a psychologist. Why should they have to do some rehab where it really is painful? And I actually noticed that the regular and very dedicated people to work with people who basically say, I don't want to do it, I can't do it. And everybody's being kind and effort. It's a lot of effort. Your parents or your girlfriend, they try to sort of say, they expect you, they want to be with you, but we gotta do it now because within a certain period of time, it is possible to take care of that. After that, it really basically, it is very, very difficult. So, in seeing what they did, I noticed that every day they would actually have a time. Okay, everybody now, after whatever they did, they would be taken to a room where there would be the rehab, and everybody hated it. So what I did was rearrange that, and that was to ask first. Of course, I had already noticed what they did, and I said, "How do you know if they're doing better? I mean, how do you know they're improving?" He says, "Well, we have this goniometer. It's a little gizmo that gives you some kind of excursion measure of how far you're moving your arm or something of the sort." Kind of interesting, actually, because I didn't know that they had that kind of thing. I said, "Well, that's it. That's all we need. With that kind of measure, now we have just a little bit of a contingency there, not very big. Basically, some movement would allow them to skip being taken to the rehab room," which is kind of obviously right there. You hear it say, how are they going to get better if you don't have them go through rehab? I said, no, you see, the problem here is that they already know about it. It's just they don't want to do it at the time and under the conditions that, you expect them to do it. So I said, why don't we do it this other way? We're going to tell them if they meet this little requirement, and if it helps them go and do the rehab, fine, but they can do it on their own anytime. And if they do it, then they'll be able actually to skip going with the group. To make a long story short, really, what happens is that they begin to do it, quotes, on their own. That's what it is. It's on their own. Well, of course, then the requirement begins to increase. As the requirement increased, they actually had to do on their own. They went and did the usual thing that rehab people expect them to do. Practice, have lots of repeats or something, which they did not want to do previously. So in a sense, you see, again, it's sort of education, if you will, but it's medical. Mm-hmm. It's a medical procedure. And that we did with the burn clinic they had here at right here in Atlanta. But then you see, again, all these things lead from one thing to the other. Then there was this thing about people who unfortunately have accidents that really the back bones are hurt in such a way, broken in such a way that they have to end up in a hospital where they're going to do surgery and so on, and they do all kinds of things, but they're repetitive. These people, after a while, they have sores because they have to be in bed for so long and under conditions that really are very hurtful. And what they found was that they would come back, and at some point, which is something that just blew my mind, I had never heard that, and that is the nurse was explaining to me that at some point, surgery doesn't help in trying to patch certain areas in the back, say. And the reason for that is that the skin gets to be like Kleenex. You can't attach anything, it just goes through. So that means that any sutures can't really work for them. I was amazed that anything like that could happen. So what we did is to begin to have a kind of a procedure. At the beginning, the question was, how are you going to motivate these people? The characteristics of a lot of these folks has to do with being high-risk takers. Usually they think of it as motorcycle people who don't want to wear their helmets, and they go into high-risk areas. Anyway, by working with these folks, the question was, how are you going to do it if it turns out Many of them are hard drinkers. Many of them take a little bit of other drugs, etc. So you can't do anything with these folks. Well, what we did was find out that we could actually have a program where we could pay relatively peanuts, like 100 a whole month, if that came out if they had actually taken care of themselves, which means having to have someone whom they could actually be living with to help them do certain kind of basic cleanliness. A lot of it's cleanliness and changing the way in which they move in their body, the way in which they sleep, a lot of other things that are associated with it. And that turned out so well that we had several individuals who would basically be helped by doing something that was, they had to have a certain requirement, obviously. They had to come back about after maybe 2 or 3 weeks and find out how things were going. We did it 1 week, 2, 3 weeks, something like that, so that we could observe directly how they were doing. And so the nurse, of course, is in charge of this kind of thing, and they have another one to make sure we have a kind of observer reliability there. And sure enough, yeah, it's better, and we're more like that. And then if you translate it into real money, it turns out the real money, we're talking about something like $100,000 or more for some of the individuals, if they did not have to have repeat kind of treatment.
Mm-hmm. So you spent a little bit of money and saved a lot.
That is right. Exactly, exactly.
Thinking back over the course of your entire career, is there anything that you would do differently if you had to do it over again? Did you miss something, or did you do something you...
That's a very, very good question. I would have liked to have learned music, actually, because I also did another thing with ballet dancers. Again, but it took me a little bit of much more time than I might have if I'd had a little more understanding of how music would actually be used. And but I got a drift of it anyway, long enough to do this work, and that was, again, how are you going to teach somebody who comes to learn how to dance when, according to a lot of people, would say, you're born that way. You're either born that way or you're not going to make it. Well, it turns out, like with a lot of things, we just, sometimes we haven't learned it because we didn't have a chance or exposure to certain kind of training. And we found, as it was the case with the tennis people, we did it with tennis, we did it with football. I don't want to bore you with the rest of it, but at some point you get the flavor. At some point you get the flavor. It's working. It doesn't matter what the sport is. And the same thing with the dancers. The idea was, but could it be done with the arts? And so I thought, okay, it's not sports anymore. It's the arts, and we did it. And again, all of these things that I'm telling you have been published. So it's not like, it's just a little experience I had. Everyone has been published. And what it tells me is that what one could have learned if I had had a little bit more, I don't know, I think a little bit more patience, if you will. I might have actually learned a little bit of what is sometimes now called neuropsychology, something like that. But I also found, as I was, as I was moving along in terms of the courses we have to take, that I could not really have the memory for learning everything, and all the bones and all the cartilages and all the axons and what they. Today, I'm very interested in that. Today, I find it much more doable, much more. I can. It's more accessible. But at the time, I thought, I want to see something that really is people. And I think that so I missed all of that completely. Neuropsychology for me is not a good idea now, because we're moving in the direction that, in fact, does not have to do with how to rearrange the environment. It is how to rearrange the brain, but in a way that is requires a lot of, soma kind of characteristics. And I think in you know, in just thinking about it, as I said, I would have liked to learn how to play actually an instrument. I would have loved that. But in psychology, I was very lucky. I learned what was available in a way that gave me a greater, shall we say, greater happiness knowing that I could look at what is happening anywhere. And because I've been around in different countries because of this, and I realized what a wonderful thing. In Chile, I once went to Santiago and I saw, of course, the token economy working with people that I'd never thought really that would go that fast. And they're doing it very well. And in Spain, and then you begin to realize, it is very nice to be able to kind of see that you did have some impact, but it was because we had, myself included, we had people who actually started something that was much more difficult, and that is how do you get anything in a methodology that allows you to have some effects on the environment. And I think that we're all obviously the children of B.F. Skinner. If he had not insisted on doing something that appeared just completely off the wall, I think we would not be here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what areas of the field would you like to see more work in right now and in the near future?
Well, I don't know if I told you, I just published a book, and of course no household could be complete without one. I brought it only because of the fact that it just did. It was a surprise to me that it was published, but it's called Headstrong, and it's for parents.
You are amazing. You have done everything.
All the things that being of interest, yes, to me at any rate. but the idea behind this is that, again, it's not that they need a new psychological test, because they've been tested. A lot of the folks, thank God, they have the test. But after you have done the test, what do? And what I do is basically realize that we don't have to have what we might call artificial kind of reinforcers. Now, you see, the idea is the token economy is fine given certain kind of context within which people basically are exposed to and are acculturated to that. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the diverse populations, and I work with them, I realized so it took me, like maybe 15 years to get them finally understood in my own head that the differences are that we reward children or punish children through our own culture. That is, we have what I call it, they're not synthetic, but they're natural ways. Mm-hmm. So this book is actually a repository of those kinds of experiences with the people who come from different places and who basically have to find out what is it that they do. Well, some of them, I'll give you an example of one of them that makes it a little bit more accessible to see that some of the problems we have are really not real problems elsewhere until the child, in this case, is suddenly confronted with people who are not within his culture or her culture, and now it's hard to know how this kid can go from culture A to culture B when certain kinds of conduct and behaviors that are expected in culture B, where the kid lives right now, is very different from that where his or her home comes from. And you say, well, they're just going to have to adapt. Well, there's some that are not as easily. The example is this. In an Asian culture, there's certain things that are considered par for the course. And one of them is that the child should not be like all American kids. Of course, all you have to do is go to to the grocery store or a mall, and you realize, here's America. I mean, look at them. They're wonderful. They're happy. They're going all over the place. They're not with their parents. The parents are walking one way. The other kids are going and asking for them or demanding that they buy this or that and so on. And you see, this is America at its best in many respects. They're free. Well, freedom of that sort is not always, shall we say, regarded as the object in life. And so in an Asian society, you have a certain, shall we say, reticence, to say the least, in acting that way in a public place. At home, you don't act that way either. You have to be very respectful of your elders, and to the point that sometimes they don't speak unless they're spoken to. Now, how would you like to work with someone who has quit speaking in the classroom, but speaks to his parents? In other words, we have in clinical stuff, they have this very special name. They call it selective mutism. Well, what does that mean exactly? It means you select who to be mute with. I mean, that's what it means. And so you wonder, wait a minute, you mean this is a clinical problem? Believe it, yeah, it is. It is, that's what it is. It is understood under a very different way of looking at it. It really, the environment is sort of passed over. Sort of, oh yeah, well, some things there, but really it's deep. And that means a different kind of approach. And of course, that's hard if, as it happens, sometimes you have the problem the other way around. The kid is mute as I said, we have it both ways. I had some kids that were mute in the classroom, not at home. I have a kid who would eat everything like every regular kid in the cafeteria, but not at home. What does that mean? Well, depending again on your culture, in this one, the kid basically becomes a real problem. The one with the selective mutism is of interest because of the fact that at some point, the question really is, does it really matter if the kid doesn't speak to his family? I mean, nobody knows about that anyway. Because in school, it's chatterbox. And so at some point, you got to say, well, it doesn't exist if it's in public then. Yeah, but what about the parents who, again, tolerate that, you might say? Well, it's not that they tolerate it, it's just that it's close to respect. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, how are you going to work with that? Because you can tell them, no, it's going to be like regular American, and say, I want my iPhone and all that kind of thing. No. I mean, so in a sense, having to work through natural contingencies really turns out to be great. I had a parent that, a regular American parent, who had a tremendous problem with having the kid, as is the case often. The kid is bright and everything, but is not applying himself. And so they did everything and so on. But one time she told me, in asking her again, well, there must be something he likes. There must be something that he is attached to. Maybe something he sees and he makes comments. Sometimes people don't look at it that way. They why do you ask, kind of thing. Of course, we know why I'm asking that, but ordinarily, a parent would rather think I'm going to be asking very fundamental, in the sense of very difficult kind of questions. And so I said, well, let me ask you. I noticed, I said, but I'm not sure. I noticed that he's very sport-minded. And that means to a lot of kids, they have to have the right kinds of things, the T-shirts. And I notice occasionally, but I'm not sure. So what do you think? Oh, don't talk to me about it. Because one of the things that he's interested in, he's got to have not just regular basketball shoes. I mean, everybody has that, but it's got to be a particular kind. It's got to be Air Jordan, I think, or something like that. And I said, is that right? He says, well, otherwise, he gets very upset. So the long and short is, I said, what would happen if you could do something about the shoes? And she was the one that really opened for me other things. And she says, well, I'll tell you what I have found. And she says, if he doesn't do certain things at home, then I'm not going to let him wear his favorite shoes. And I said, oh, okay, and that was it. But then I thought, what if we went a little bit further than that? And said, if he was always in trouble in school, and so there were notes and comments from the teachers, etc. And I said, what if he went, say, a couple or 3 days without any complaint and notes from the principal, etc., that he's misbehaving? Would it be possible to do something about the shoes? And I said, well, yes, but he's gonna, he won't want to wear just anything. I said, what if he has a choice? So it's not like you gotta force him. He's got a choice. The choice is a different kind of shoes. Oh, I know what you mean. And then she really went to it. She said, I know exactly what to do. And she said, let me do it my way. I said, great. So it comes back the next time. The kid is doing well, and I said, how is it that you're doing it? And she says, well, I gave him a choice, but I first went with him to pay something or other. I mean, there's a store where you can buy inexpensive shoes. They're very nice shoes. They're not brand. It turned out that he liked brand. That was I didn't realize that. She said, oh, it's got to be brand. Everything's got to be brand. Well, so now the choice was regular $5 T-shirt and regular shoes from an inexpensive store, or the other things that he liked that he already had. But access to them on a daily basis was contingent on, again, if there were no notes or it, I mean, good day, no news is good news. Mm-hmm. And so that way began to really extend that to a variety of other things that have to do with the things that you use at home.
The natural environment.
The natural environment.
And this is what your book is about.
And that's where.
And I love the title of it, Headstrong. That's great. That's a great title to the book.
Yeah, right, because they're not sick.
Yeah, that's right. They're just headstrong.
That's right.
I have two more questions for you. One is, if you looked into the future and tried to get a picture of what you see as the future of behavior analysis, where do you see it going? Where do you think it might go, or fear that it might go? What's your take on that?
Well, I think I think we've got we have to break away, frankly, from something that we have imposed upon ourselves, and that is there's certain areas we keep on working on ad infinitum, and I think we've got to start doing things. For example, right now, it doesn't matter where you look at. It doesn't matter if you just read the paper. You'll find out that we're still having problems about how to determine whether or not kids are doing better in school. I mean, by now that's all had, but they're still having problems as to whether or not, for example, in one particular school right now, where Zuckerberg, I guess I can say his name, the one who did the Facebook, is given something like, I think, X number of millions of dollars to New Jersey to really get things going in terms of school. The only problem I see there is that we don't have a method to be able to determine whether things are getting better or not. And that is an example. The same thing with respect to whether it be about the environment, the effects of the environment on anything. We don't seem to have someone, behaviorally speaking, to determine that really there may be a way of combining certain interests, people coming from here and here that are in opposition to one another. But we really, all of us, I believe, we really want to do right. The only trouble, we don't seem to agree on what is the right thing, which means we don't know what works. But if we knew how it works, like right now in terms of the economy, of course, it's the most obvious one. We're trying to compare maybe what's happening in England is really already a forerunner of something that's a disaster, according to some people. Other people say, we got to get back to the 1920s to realize that, certain things work in a better way if you did certain things. It's a matter of how about, where are the behaviors here? Mm-hmm. And so I'm saying you got to get out of these very little sort of fiefdoms we have and move on to problems. The problems are all over the place. The only thing is, for a variety of reasons, we don't seem to have a kind of a department of applied. Not a given department, it's applied. What do you want to work on? Mm-hmm. That is the thing.
Yeah, we do.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. North Texas.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm.
That is very good.
It's not just
to
applied,
hear.
It's applied and basic, but there are people working in animal training with autism, developmental disabilities, in schools with second languages.
That is great. You
yeah.
see, well, then the next thing, of course, is to make sure that we disseminate that kind of a model, because in many respects, I think that is what's constraining us to repeat ourselves, because we don't have. How do you do it? How do you get people to get along when sometimes they may think that this is more important than this? They're all important.
Yes, they are. And you really may have already answered my last question, which is, what message would you like to give to students of the future? If students come and look at your interview here, what do you want to say to them?
Well, I think, this might seem sort of foolish, but I think that if I were starting today, I would realize that you've got greater degree of assistance, greater degree of guidance, greater degree of opportunities. The only thing is, don't repeat what's already there. Move on from there. And I think in that sense, the world now is open in a way that wasn't open before. I mean, people could, I would say one of the first things, not a bad idea to learn another language, I'll tell you that. I'm learning French for years. I must say I haven't picked it up well, but I'm still learning. And the thing is, I would say, you have to be disseminating what's already here. But you don't have to repeat it. It's just that now you can open it according to what are some of the cultural differences, some of the very special ways in which people do certain things, rather than imitate something that works within a particular culture.
I think that's a wonderful idea, and that's a great message for the students. And thank you so much for this discussion.
I'm delighted.
And we just want to say that there will be a lecture by you, too, that students will be able to look at, and also people who want to get continuing education credit and so forth.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so hopefully they will listen to your lecture, because I have learned a lot by listening to you. So thank you so much for taking time for doing this.
It was a very nice interview. I liked it. Okay.